Well, dear viewer, let's continue. As the saying goes, who is talking about what, and Mark Murnov, about his own. I understand that this topic, which is rather boring, as having no basis, and everyone has already decided that this is just an invention of the author, a legend. Once I, like you, thought and brushed it aside. But everything changed in one boring evening. Lu are the only legendary treasures on which there is a map showing 14 tons of gold. The riddle code, like their code, has long been considered the key to a clear understanding of Masonic symbolism. The map, published by Karl von Muller, consists of various mathematical formulas. The map you are looking at is one of the most famous maps in treasure history. The Lu map seems to be of Nazi origin. The map was created by an unnamed Nazi loyalist in the United States, whose property was used as cash site for 100 tons of gold bullion that was smuggled into the US by Nazi agents. The purpose of the Nazi mission was to sell the gold on the US market and to crash the US economy, which would stop the US from entering World War II. Around this same time, the United States passed the American Gold Act, which prevented the Nazis from selling the gold on the open market. Someone in the U.S. intelligence had learned about the Nazi plot. The Nazis then moved in to try and recover the gold with the hopes of smuggling it back out of the US before they could be stopped by US agents. But the Nazi loyalist whose property they had buried the gold on had mysteriously died, taking the secret of the Lu map with him. The Nazis were not able to crack the map on their own, and they dug all over the loyalists' property for the gold but could not find the cache. Their dig was called off by Hitler and they returned to Germany. The gold is still in the ground to this day. Probably, I'll start with the fact that when I first got acquainted with the history of this card, I was discouraged by the many contradictions and absurdities of this story. It makes no sense to list them. And after a little reflection, I chuckled and forgot this story as utter nonsense. Besides, the prehistory to it about the allegedly lost keys and difficulties did not give any hope anyway. On my second acquaintance with this topic, more than 30 years later, I looked at it somewhat differently. Here is how it was. I was on vacation and it was already coming to an end. All the entertainment available to me was fed up. I was bored and I took up my pastime, started solving chess puzzles. Having stumbled across the internet, where I was looking for chess references, on the story with Lu's card, I vaguely recalled that I had already met her once. I again carefully read the story and was surprised only that it again, for some reason, appeared on the internet. It would seem this fake should have long ago been debunked and lowered into the junk of oblivion. But I was bored, and I decided to look at the map as another chess problem, to try to at least understand whether there is any meaning in this picture and what the author was trying to draw, what this set of symbols means. In general, without any interest in the topic of the card, without naive dreams about an alleged treasure with gold. Just for fun, and without any illusions. If you've ever solved chess problems, you know how it happens. Made a move, look through the options. If the move leads to an error after calculating the options, then you need to discard it and look for another option. So, examining one by one the element of the drawing, making, so to speak, a chess move, I tried to look for meaning in it and calculate the answer options. Something like this, and it looked. And suddenly a picture from the puzzles began to appear. And now, this has already interested me, as a solution not to an abstract problem, but to a very real topic. Furthermore, I got headlong into this story, starting to read and study many documents, a kind of diving into the history and reality of the time when this map was born. Now, I understand that if it were not for the cold, judicious approach to solving this problem, I would not have been able to decipher it. And the most important thing is that the puzzles all came together, the picture opened, very logical and darkly bewitching. From boredom and free time, I took up the map as a chess task, so simple, without much interest. Gradually, step by step, taking into account the details and thinking through solutions, an interesting picture began to open. And at first the assumptions suddenly began to be confirmed by facts, from various sources. The topic began to attract more and more, the history of people and their biographies, events that were somehow related to the creation of this map. I began to study material, myths, and legends and much more. Everything was present when creating this card. Gradually, I found out who created this map and why. We must pay tribute. This is not an ordinary person, I would call him a genius, and this is not the Nazi whom a priori everyone considered the author. In fact, the author of the map was executed in April 1945. His genius in the fact that he was the most outstanding psychologist. He knew the subtleties of thinking of 99% of people and took everything into account. The very existence of this card is better than any defense. The fact that the card exists simply proves that this story is supposedly bluffing, and that the card is just a fake with a set of characters. And this, the author's genius. The calculation was correct. Even if someone decrypts the card, then, firstly, few people will believe it. After all, for the security services it has long been clear that this is a bluff. He skillfully introduced it, and secondly, they are at their best they'll think about a psycho in the case, and thirdly, even if they allow the thought that it's really so. What proves the correct calculation? Our author is a psychologist. Many people wonder if there was such an operation, why there is not a single witness who would not have leaked the information. The answer is obvious. Due to the excessive secrecy of this operation, all the performers participating in it were destroyed. This was, by the way, to our author. The remaining involved, influential people were skillfully and wisely eliminated by the author himself. I found out why the card was needed at all and why it was so, why it had such a strange name. I found out, that is, I decoded both the place and the precautions that must be observed in order to penetrate the secret vault. I also recognized the second dark side, maps of Lu. Besides its apparent simplicity, there are actually many difficult things. I paid tribute to the author of the creation of the map, surprised at his courage, and cunning of the author. I learned that it was originally planned that the operation would fail, and the whole story with her was brilliantly foreseen by the author and correctly calculated. Since the author did not need a plan of action to destabilize America before the war, he pursued his personal goals. And therefore, there probably is not only the declared gold of 14 tons, but also his personal savings, so to speak, for old age, possibly in a different form and quality. I also learned that the second plan for the development of this operation was and remains relevant. So to say, Plan B, in the end, in such operations, a second plan is always developed, both in case of failure and in unforeseen circumstances, and as a guarantee for the author that in case of disclosure no one will get anything. After all, nothing would have prevented them from additionally bringing in several tons of explosives. And the fact that after 80 years the probability of automatically triggering a second unpleasant surprise increases every day. An event may occur that was originally planned by Hitler himself and, a little by the author of the map. And it cannot be ruled out that there may be casualties and the destruction of the object, which is important for Americans, so to speak. I have decrypted the card, but I am not saying that at the moment gold is still stored in the indicated place, because, firstly, it is possible that the special services decrypted the card a long time ago, and this is not a secret. But I did not find evidence of this version. Since this story will probably appear in the media, but this did not happen, which, in my opinion, speaks in favor of the opposite. But the most important thing here is not gold, but the threat of an explosion of enormous strength, a historical object. And, accordingly, you need to adhere to the map plan so that tragedy does not happen, but for this you need to follow the rules listed on the map, which means that you need to know the decryption. I can say with confidence that the mystery of the card, which remained a mystery for 80 years, was revealed by me, and I can prove it if necessary. The most frequent question in the discussion of this topic is similar to the question of the respected but how can only 14 tons, or 100 tons, upset, destroy, the U.S. economy, having national reserves, which in 1940 were measured in tens of thousand tons. An economist and not a financier, but such an assumption seems unlikely. You don't have to be a financier to understand this. You just need to remember what the U.S. economy was like in 1937 to 1938. Here is the reference. The economic downturn that took place in the United States during the Great Depression and the New Deal of President Franklin Roosevelt's administration. Dubbed the Roosevelt Recession. The political deadlock of 1937, associated with the formation of opposition to the New Deal in the U.S. Congress, coincided with the resumption of the economic crisis. In May, the recovery peaked and by August, economic activity again markedly decreased. In September, observers, including Minister Henry Morgenthau, began to notice an already rapid decline. In October, the U.S. stock market was shaken again by the crisis, which caused the horror of 1929 to be remembered. The pace of the new decline even overshadowed the rate of decline in the economy in 1929, with stocks losing more than a third of their value in just a few weeks, and corporate profits plummeting nearly 80%. Steel production in the last quarter of the year fell to a quarter of the mid-year level, resulting in a 40% decline in total industrial production. At the beginning of 1938, payments to the unemployed in Detroit quadrupled compared to 1937. The organization of new unions virtually ceased, and by the end of winter more than 2 million workers had received notice of layoffs. They expanded the ranks of the unemployed, bringing their total to less than 10 million, or 19% of the workforce. I completely don't know all the subtleties of the mechanism that affect the quotes of the stock markets, but I know that very often they are affected by various kinds of dumping. There is the concept of exchange panic. The stock market rush can lead to panic. The development of the operation, let's call it conditionally, red tail began in the early spring of 1939. For Hitler, in those conditions, all that was needed was a dumping of gold prices, to create a panic on the American stock exchange, which would lead to excitement, a fall in prices for it and, accordingly, could become a trigger for an economic recession, and this could again plunge the country into an internal political crisis. And for this plan, a huge amount of gold was not needed. It was enough, about 100 tons. It was only necessary, correctly, to choose a place and calculate the time. And with a targeted strike, for a while, Hitler knew that it was not realistic to destroy the economy, but he could gain time, to exclude the main and dangerous player from the game at the beginning of the war. He needed time to seize new resources, so that later, on an equal footing, or even superior, to fight America, hated by him, which could stand in his way to world domination. He hated and feared this player. Hitler all his life dreamed of world power, believed that Germany should become a great empire and a new force in the world, so that the capital of Germany would become the main city, a metropolis from which he would rule the whole world. Having received practically unlimited power, he began to implement the goals outlined in Mein Kampf. First secretly and then openly, he went to violate the terms of the Versailles Treaty, which in fact deprived Germany of the army. After becoming Chancellor, Hitler began to pursue an aggressive foreign policy. In October 1933, Germany withdrew from the League of Nations. In just 5 years, he brought the country out of the crisis by raising industrial production, eliminating unemployment, and betting on militarization. His dreams began to take on tangible forms. He had the right to be proud of himself. But his plans could be hampered by the United States. For a long time he thought about one problem: where to strike the first blow, in the West or in the East. If he strikes in the West, the United States will immediately enter the war, and this is a very serious enemy, and he is not yet ready to fight with him. To strike in the East. The solution to the problem, with the entry into the game of the United States, in the early stages of the war, he found unexpectedly, looking at one interesting document. As many must know, Hitler was a mystic and esoteric. He was fascinated by everything connected with this. He believed in Providence. Providence itself helps us. Surely, he thought. And the plan ripened instantly. He gave the order to the adjutant to call urgently Walter Funk, Reich Minister of Economy. After consulting with Funk, he invited several more people, I will not name them, and, sharing the general features of the plan, ordered to start developing the operation.